All right, hey folks, welcome to Space Hangouts once again. This time the topic is somewhat unusual, but unusually for me, lore, brought to you by, I have CCP Falcon here.
Hello.
How is it going? How is Iceland?
It's actually gone remarkably sunny. It was really crappy earlier today, and it's been a really bad week. It's just been like horrific weather, but it's really sunny today. So I have like one of my cats sunbathing on my balcony, and the other one's bothering me for food right now.
Nice, nice. Yeah, it is a million friggin' degrees here in the United States, where I I I chose to move to Boston, which is great, except that it's, -10 in the winter and 35 in the summer. So everything about this is awful. Anyways, while we wait for more people to get in here and join the hangout, um, I guess tell us a little about where lore is at in EVE Online these days.
It's kind of quiet right now. I think the last really big thing we had happen was the Battle for Clotari Prime, which was like last year. And then we've sort of been in a state where kind of the Federation and the state have still remained at odds, and they're kind of trying to sort of pick up the pieces politically and militarily after the biggest conflict they've come to in the last, like, God, 100 years or so.
Sure. What about all the pirate stuff that's been going on? There was the Ghost Sites live event that got a lot of flack last fall. And then we've got Valkyrie coming out, and obviously that's a very heavily Garista storyline.
Yeah, so I definitely think there's going to be a lot more focus on the pirates in future. I mean, like right now, it's sort of like the narrative is kind of sort of focusing on the fact that the main four core empires are kind of losing grip on power, and capsuleers are starting to become like a faction in their own right. And this has been highlighted just by the state of the empires really, and the fact that the pirate factions are sort of encroaching on their borders. So yeah, moving forward, there's going to be a lot more focus on the pirates and a lot more focus on what's going on kind of in the underworld of Eve and the less legitimate side of Eve.
Right? Stuff like, well, I guess anything that's happening outside of the strict Empire spaces.
Yeah, pretty much. And there'll be a lot of Guristas involvement, I should imagine. There'll be some, the Endel cartel have always got their fingers in every pie. Sanchez still running amok, so we've got a lot of content to play with.
Sure. Aha, got our first extra person. Hello, welcome.
Hello, Salhani, stopping again.
Yeah.
And Seamus Donahue of Eve University. Uh, joined up. All right. So, how did making Valkyrie a real game? Someone is going. I'll find out who. How did making Valkyrie a real game end up affecting the lore direction? Was that something that you guys found easy to tie in, or did you have to do a little bit of backbending?
Um, no, I don't think it was something that really was a huge problem to fit in. It's like things have kind of moved on sort of dynamically. There was already the theme that kind of the empires are losing their grip on power, that the pirate factions are sort of starting to erode their power base and encroach on their borders. So I mean, Valkyrie's kind of a natural progression of that, I think, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. I know I've spoken to CCP Torvi France, our creative director for Eve IP, and he's pretty excited about where things are going. And we've been talking quite heavily about what's going to happen in terms of Valkyrie Valkyrie pilots being brought into the mix, and then you have what's going on with Dust right now as well. So yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting, but it's not as if the development of Valkyrie kind of sort of threw us a huge curveball. It's more that we just thought, this is cool, and it kind of fits with the theme of what we're doing. If anything, kind of when we saw Valkyrie coming and we knew that it was going to kind of be a thing, so to speak, it was more, how can we fit this in? And it made sense to kind of run with the angle that we're going with, which is kind of the group of pilots who are effectively guns for hire.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as as a EVE Online mercenary, that makes me very excited because it's my people, as it were. So one question for you, and then I'll open this up to the other two folks in here. For you, what area of the storyline would you most like to get the opportunity to work on?
Well, thankfully, I'm in the position where I kind of work on it all. I've been really fortunate to get dragged into being pretty heavily involved with it. That started with assisting in the writing of Eve Source, and it's just it's really good to be involved in it all. But there are particular areas that I like. I really like sort of the politics that are going on in the Galente Federation. I'm a huge fan of the Guristas as well, obviously, so I was really happy to hear that Valkyrie was going to be very heavily involved with the Guristas. And I'm more interested than anything than the sort of the dark, seedy criminal underworld of EVE, like all the black market trading that goes on, the illegal cloning, the Dead Space black market trading outposts, that kind of thing, and just the sort of stuff that is it has sort of a dark, gritty feel to it, and it's it's a little less legitimate than, say the politics in the Omar Empire or the Kaldari state. It's I definitely prefer the underworld of EVE.
Interesting. Cool. Seamus, what part of the lore would you like to see more of?
First of all, can you hear me?
I can. I suspect you are talking through your laptop speakers right now.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes, and you're not echoing. No, you are echoing. Weird. Yep, that's working.
Anyway, I don't have a coherent question formed in my mind yet. I'm just thinking about the subject of some players roleplay as being loyal to one of the high security powers, the Galente Federation or the Mimitar Republic, Kaldari State, or some might be loyal to Concord or the Sisters of Eve or what have you. So I'm just thinking how this is going to affect players like that. But like I said, I haven't had a chance to come up with a coherently formed question yet.
So, looking at it on a sort of a high-level overview scale, I don't think it's going to affect people too much. I think it's going to put us in a position where, maybe the empires need a little bit more help from those loyal capsuleers. Maybe they find that they're, that they're short-handed in terms of, having the military capacity to be able to deal with encroaching pirate factions. Maybe they're going to find out that they just need assistance industrially or whatever. It's difficult to put a finger on it, and I think that's more of a question that will be answered by changes in game design in the future, maybe, or potentially new features that might get introduced to kind of reflect that and to give people a way to interact with the fact that the empires are losing power. It's interesting. It's I don't think it's something that's fully fleshed out and formed out right now, but I'm sure that there'll be some way for players to assist.
Question I got on Twitter was, why can't folks start in the NPC pirate factions yet? Or, I guess, will they ever be able to?
That's something I love. I mean, I'd love to be able to create a rookie character and have him start out in the Guristas, for instance, or the Serpentis Corporation, and kind of play the angle of the sort of low-life drug runner, or the kind of the black market debt collector or something like that. I think it would be really interesting for character development to be able to mess around like that. So I'm a big supporter of that kind of change, definitely. And I'd love to see us be able to do that in future. I mean, it's entirely down to where game design want to take things. And unfortunately, while I may be able to fool around and influence backstory, unfortunately, I can't be like, hey guys, give us more spaceships or make this happen. So that's definitely an interesting question. It's something I'd love to see, but it's something that's entirely dedicated to game design's direction rather than storyline.
Yeah, it's something the CSM sometimes does. Hey guys, give us different spaceships, give us more content, whatever.
Yes, starting off in NPC Null would be a somewhat rougher introduction
exciting.
to EVE Online.
Yeah, it would get ugly pretty quickly.
I mean, it's important that everyone learn about gate camps in their or not gate camps, station bubble camps with like 3 friggin' carriers in the
Yeah,
first.
but Nullsec says that's the only way to play.
So the forums assure me. Salva, what area of the storyline would you like to see a little bit more engagement in?
I don't know. The lower side is, unless it's actually blended in and you've got feedback and you can actually affect the changes, until that happens, nothing's there, in my opinion. I mean, until you can get Lockjaw or whatever it was called actually active and stuff like that, and you can put a goalpost in space for Capsuleers to work on it, that affects the lore, but doesn't affect the empires and the nullsec cartels and all that stuff. Until that actually happens and the tools for that are in game and people have stuff that they can work on that's not battle meta, lore doesn't interest me at all.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like actually being able to put stuff in game that can potentially affect backstory. I was kind of back when I was a player. I was kind of hoping that would kind of be what factional warfare would be, sort of thing, where you would see like a huge shift in terms of like maybe the Gallente would take all of the systems that were up for grabs, and there'd be a huge shift towards looking more at Gallente backstory, looking at more at the fact that they were sort of like that the Caldari economy was suffering because of the fact they lost a crap load of systems and a load of natural resources, and just kind of a little bit more dynamic content in that respect. I love to see that. In the same respect, I think it's a rabbit hole that if you dive into it can be pretty fun, but if you go too deep down it, you could end up in chaos. So it does kind of have to be directed in some way, shape, or form. But in the same respect, like I'd absolutely love players to be able to just like dive into the game and to push really hard to actually change backstory. It would be fantastic. I mean, that has happened in the past. When we were speaking about the Guristas earlier, I mean that's one thing that happened back in like 2004 with the Corlear incident, when one of the co-founders of the Guristas was killed or apparently killed by players during a live event, and he hasn't been seen since. And there's now just one guy running the Guristas, for instance. We've had Salvador Sapati escape with a Titan because he was assisted by players in doing so. It's something that like I'd love to see more of, but in the same respect, we have to kind of be careful just how deep we go unless we have the back-end tools and the content to support it, which right now we really don't. Something that we really need to work on.
The big thing that I've heard there is the idea of just connecting more systems to factional warfare. So, for example, the cost indices that are coming in Creus, if those were in part influenced by an empire's fortune in factional warfare, then the empire that you align yourself, and if your costs were affected by the empire that you were aligning yourself with, you end up with this whole system where it, your choice of option in Xander, your background is very noisy.
Let me hit my mic.
All right, cool. But yeah, you end up with sort of a push-pull thing.
Yeah, but as with everything, if you overdo it, and it's not interesting if it doesn't give somebody a big advantage, and if the big advantage is there, everybody's going to min-max it and go to it. And then they'll complain that they can't switch because they're locked in.
Yeah, and I mean this is exactly why like it's that kind of sort of interactivity is generally in the hands of game design rather than storyline, because as much as we
have two people talking over each other.
No, we don't.
You must be lagging on stream, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like as much as it's great to have like huge overarching effects from the player side of things, it's more in the hands of game design rather than storyline, and it has to be practical because as robust as if the economy of EVE Online is, it's kind of it does hang in the balance, and if you screw with it too much, it may get to the point where one of these events turns into something that artificially like affects the economy drastically, or gives us a huge problem, and then we have to sort of we have to dip our hand in and try and correct it, which is not something that we want to have to do.
Sure. We have one question from Web Spaceships on Twitter. Do we have any live events coming up?
Well, that would ruin the surprise if I was like, yeah, we've got an event happening next week. Then it would be like, well. But right now, we're actually going to be sitting down in the next few weeks, and we're going to be looking at what we want to do for storyline for the next of 2014 and running into 2015. So we'll be sitting down and looking what we want to do. But I can't give anything away right now.
That's such a cop-out answer.
Yeah, it's a complete cop-out answer because there's absolutely no way in hell I'm going to reveal all the dirty secret plans that we have. So.
That's why you go on podcasts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just kind of have to, navigate myself around the questions that would potentially spoil the future fun for people.
This is like our program.
Just make sure you're not leading people into 10% time dilation again.
Well, thankfully, I hold my hands up because I was actually away from working on live events when when Operation Spectre happened, and when I came back, I was like, God, no, why? But it was that one could have been handled better, definitely, and we learn a lot from it. Namely, 10% tie-dye is a bad thing when you're trying to run a bubble camp. But it's something that we've learned a lot from, and we learn a lot with these live events, like the huge stuff that happened in the past. So stuff like Kaldari Prime, Operation Spectre when a lot of people died. We still actually learn, like from a technical standpoint, we still kind of learn a lot about it that we can put into working on the game, because it's not often that we get to stress test Tranquility like that. I mean, when we ran Operation Highlander, the battle for Kaldari Prime, that was 8,000 people effectively, and I think it was spread across 2 nodes. So I know we had like CCP Veritas, who was like watching server logs, messing around with things, and sort of trying to get a picture of how the server was behaving. And we learn a lot from Kaldari Prime that's since been utilized. So it's it can be kind of ugly when a bad event happens. Hopefully, no bad events will happen in future. But even when a lot of people die, we still learn a lot, and it's good.
Yeah. The other question, I suspect I know the answer to this, but are we going to see the Jove storyline anytime in the near future?
Or are they all dead?
I love it when this question comes up. I love it, and I just sort of do what I'm doing now, and I'll just navigate around it. And I've never met a Jovian, so I couldn't tell you what's going on with those guys. But there's a lot of unknowns out there, and you guys will just have to see what happens, I guess, in the future. I can't really talk about the Jovians. I'm bound by all kinds of paperwork and terrible things that people will take me into dark rooms at CCP and beat me with sticks and do terrible things like that if I was to open my mouth regarding Jovian people. So I just have plausible deniability. I just pretend that I know nothing about them.
I mean, technically, the Jove Empire still has a seat on the Concord Assembly. When was the last time they actually sent a representative?
Again, what happens at Concord stays at Concord.
Well, the last time they actually met all the 4 heads of the empires was right before the clone instance happened, and that's in the lore.
Mhm.
But that did that have a Concord representative? I don't think it did.
No, it didn't actually. The Jovian directorate wasn't present then. But yes, it was. I believe at the time it was the CEO, the chief executive panel. It was Dorian Corzo. Yeah, it was and it was Albin Sorrow Fortin for the Galante Federation. He was the president back then. Yeah, so yeah, there would have been no Jovians there. There would have been no Jovians. You can't have any Jovians.
I have a question, Falcon. I'm not sure if it strictly falls under the remit of this conversation, but let's go for it anyway. How successful or unsuccessful within CCP itself was the True Stories comic book that Dark Horse did a few months ago? How well received was that internally for you guys?
Internally at CCP, we absolutely loved it. Like we so it's actually pretty funny. We pre-sold it at FanFest, so we got a couple of copies of it into the office, and I was lucky enough to get a hold of the first copy that came on site because I work quite heavily on it with Dark Horse, and I was like walking down. I was walking across the 4th floor, walked down the stairs to the 3rd floor where game design is, and I was walking back through to the community area. Like there was about 4 or 5 people who were like, "Oh!" They were like, sort of like everyone's head turned at the same time. And it went, yeah. The first copy of it that came to CCP went around probably like 15, 20 people, and they all took a look at it. And yeah, it was really well received internally. I mean, it was the finished product was really high quality, and we're very happy with it. So. Yeah,
do you guys have any? I mean, I know it's not the original issues were available for free digitally, but have you guys been given any idea of like sales figures, pre-sales figures for the hardback collected trade? Do you guys know how well it's done for Dark Horse, or if it's something that's going to happen again, or taking that forward?
I know we pretty much sold out of them at FanFest. As far as I'm aware, we had no copies left, so we kind of underestimated how popular it would be at FanFest. And I think that maybe that's like because it was a pre-sale and it was out like a month beforehand, so people just snapped it up while they could, kind of thing, to say that they got the first copy. That generally tends to happen at FanFest. In terms of actual sales figures, I'm not exactly sure. I haven't gotten any metrics from Dark Horse, but I'm actually interested, so I'm probably going to find out, to be fair. But the guy who heads up like our relationship with Dark Horse is our VP for business development, who I talk to now and again. So yeah, I could probably find out from him, in fact. And I'm interested now. You've piqued my interest, and I must find out these numbers. But yeah, as far as I'm aware from speaking to people, it sold pretty well. It's above our expectations, at least. So yeah, I mean, it's quite nice. I'm happy with it.
So Web Spaceships says EveSource answers that question on Jove in Concord. I do remember reading about them, but I don't remember the precise answer there.
Yes, so read EveSource. That's the answer to that question.
My question is how, now that at least the department that the layoffs happened was supposedly the printing department, or at least that's the way it was worded. Publishing. Yeah. How much of publishing actually was done of those personnel was the majority of people work on EveSource?
And EveLore, because certainly.
Yeah.
There was one person. Obviously, people know that obviously CCP Etern was let go. He's he stated that publicly, and he was like sort of my partner in crime, as it were, for live events, and he also contributed really heavily alongside me with EveSource, and he also contributed to True Stories as well. So yeah, I mean, in terms of people no longer working on lore who were working on lore before that, just one person. So the rest of us are all still here.
All right, that answers that, which is good news.
Yeah, it's nice to know that we've still got a solid group of people, and even when you look at who's working on lore and who's actually interested in lore at CCP, there's like a small core group of people who like work on it actively, but there's a lot of people within the company who are interested in it and who like got a hold of a copy of EveSource and who are really interested in hearing about it and hearing about backstory development. So It's
Talking about lore or actions in the game, the new warp-off animation actually showing up in the tutorials at the site, actually seeing them warp off and in is like so cool.
yeah, we have a really good group of guys working on the new player experience right now. It's something that's needed quite a bit of love for a while, and it's something that has a good focused team on it now. So
The
I'm
only
hoping
thing,
things in that respect.
yeah, the only thing I can say with testing side and people that are using it is that they're not communicating when they're making changes on Sissy to it. And if they're not communicating, there's no way for us to run through and check if how it's doing. Because they made some changes. I ran it last week. I'm running it again because Simon said something was broke that wasn't broke for me. So if that's the case and they're not public, if they don't push out when they're making changes, we're not going to test it, and it's going to hit TQ, and I'm going to check it on my last check a week before release, and I'm going to find 5 bugs that have to be fixed like right now, or nobody's going to see, no new player's going to get in the game, and that's happened more than once. So it's kind of annoying.
Yeah, and this is something that this is something you can bring to us, or you can bring to the CSM. It's something that I can talk to people about definitely. That's why I'm here. That's why the CSM are here. So,
yeah, I filed a bug report earlier today. Apparently, civilian salvagers can no longer open the spawn container for balancing the books 2 of 10.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Well, here's a lore question for you, Falcon. Well, a lore writing question. So you're going into a world where capsuleers are more dominant, are more, the ones who are doing things, more central. How do you deal with the fact that capsuleers are fucking assholes who will ruin anything you try to do?
I think that's just inherent in the mentality of a capsuleer. They're very destructive people. I think you have to have a certain mindset to you have to have a certain physical
Not
condition.
all of us are murderous liars with god complexes. Thank you.
Well, no, not all of us are. And certainly I've never, to the extent that I've role-played, I've never played Ali as a murderous liar with a god complex.
Have you ever destroyed a pirate faction battleship while you've been out NPCing? Congratulations, you just killed several thousand people. So, if you believe that you're
real people, I mean, I'm kidding.
People will say, I'm not a bad guy, I go out on NPC a little bit. Yeah, but every battleship you destroy, you're effectively, taking the lives of several thousand people. So, it's interesting that some people don't feel like they're bad, but capsuleers by their very nature destructive. They're put in charge of, even a capsuleer that's put in charge of a frigate has enough firepower to level an entire city. So it's it makes me chuckle. It makes me chuckle because capsuleers inherently are not nice people generally. You have to have a certain physical and mental condition to be able to get through the training. It's very rigorous. It's very intense. And yeah, I suppose you do sort of on the side of things have to be a little bit unhinged too. And you certainly do have to have a little bit of a god complex too, I suppose, because that's effectively sort of, in broad strokes, kind of what you become.
I put my Q&A window away, but no one's asked anything. Yeah, I mean, it's more, I was thinking less capsuleers in terms of that thing, and more capsuleers, you've got people who are not interested in the lore, or who are interested in the lore only in as much as it involves, dunking on role players and whatnot. And how do you manage having them in a position where they're in many ways now more central to that lore?
Well, I think this is a question that kind of every game studio who invests in their backstory for an MMO kind of has to face. There are people that will play the game, and there are people that there are 3 types of people in terms of interaction with storyline in my opinion. So there's the passive people who are just players, who are just like, yeah, I don't really give a shit. I don't really read the text in my in my quests or my missions in whatever game I'm playing. I just click it. I go and I collect the crap I need to. I give it to like whoever the hell, and I get my reward for it, and that's it. Then there are the people who kind of they take a little bit of interest in it, and maybe they'll dip into it now and again. And there are the people who like get nicknamed kind of immersioneers, which is like those are the people who they will religiously read everything. Those are the people who will ask you all the awkward questions about like
Where are
shit
the
that you
jokes?
really like shit that you really can't talk about because it's for the future. And like, so yeah, there's those three subsets of people, and kind of the people who just want to dick about and try and wreck it for people are kind of sort of a subset of just the players who don't really give a crap about the lore. But you're making a game for everyone. You're not just making a game that's immensely immersive for just the people who want to immerse themselves in the backstory. So yeah, there has to be a little bit of to and fro. There's got to be give and take. And if a bunch of people come and crash an event, it's what happened with Operation Spectre, the Ghost Site events last year.
Mm-hmm.
Effectively, fair enough, the tie-dye stuff was dumb and it could have been organized better. But what happened effectively was a bunch of nullsec people camped a few gates and just blapped everyone that came through, would trap them in bubbles. And this happens, and it turns out that several people were fired from various navies and stuff off the back of that. So
Sure.
I mean, so yeah, we react to it. Although sometimes, like, I mean, the same thing happens with game design. For instance, the old classic is, there was a system for creating bookmarks in EVE when it was first, released, and people found, hey, if I fly 15 kilometers past the gate, I can create a bookmark, warp to it at 15, and it drops me on the gate, and there we go, I've created the Insta bookmark system. And
Sure.
so the thing that we have with EVE is that we have an incredibly intelligent player base who will look for every single possible way to bend the rules as much as they friggin' can without breaking them. This is just the way the mentality of an EVE player works. So yeah, when we design events, we have to constantly fight back against that mentality. And thankfully, most of the people who are involved with events kind of have been that kind of mentality as a player in the past. So we sort of have an idea of what's going to happen, but then, for instance, several events have happened in the past where it's been like, Jesus Christ, why, what, and then we have to go and, go back to the drawing board. And it's just, yeah, it can be frustrating at times having to deal with asshattery, so to speak, and people getting really, really smart about what they do.
Yeah, certainly, Pandemic Legion just repping the provosts was...
Yeah, I mean,
great.
exactly. And in the end, we trolled Pandemic Legion with one of our events where they thought they were going to get to kill them in the end. And, they didn't have tackle in the carrier, so we're like, thanks for helping us, guys, see you later, and we just left. And they were like, what the fuck, you know what I mean? And we called their bluff on that one, and thankfully we got away with it. We didn't get caught with our pants down. And that meant that the next event, instead of having a given number of ships, we had that number of ships plus the number of ships from the previous event that escaped that we could put into a fight. And it ended up being a bigger fight where a lot more people were awarded different prizes. So it worked out in the end for us, despite the quote-unquote asshattery that we had from people who were trying to, like, contradict what we wanted the outcome of the event to be. So yeah,
Sure.
we've just got to work with it. I mean, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's a pain in the ass, but it all works out well in the end.
It's certainly an interesting problem for EVE. So how much do you work with, say, game design on... Because when something's going to come out and it's like, well, how are we going to justify this in the lore? Is that something that you work with game design on, or you let game designers make that up, or
so
what?
generally, there's a group of people at CCP, including a couple of our content designers are involved in that group as well, who are really vested and interested in Eve's backstory. So generally, we sit down and we talk about it. If there's going to be any big changes, I mean, for instance, if there's anything we feel we can run an event off the back of, or a chain of events running up to something being released, then we'll do it if we can, and if we have the manpower and the ability to do so. So it's kind of, yeah, I mean, for the best part, the person who deals with that is CCP Abraxas.
Okay.
He generally, well, he is effectively he's a senior writer, but he's also working in content as well, and he works alongside CCP Affinity, who is like one of our primary content designers, who is like the same as me, a massive backstory nerd. So it's sort of down to those guys, and the rest of the storyline team that also includes CCP Torre France, myself, and a couple of other people. CCP Delegate Zero's in there as well. He's another one of our game designers who has a really strong interest in backstory. So yeah, it's in good hands, and it's something that like we sit down and we talk about. We kind of try and flesh ideas out. We run over like descriptions of stuff that's going to go into the game, and we just generally like all act as a sounding board to make sure that we don't screw up. That's basically the most fundamental way of putting it. We're all a sanity check for each other's craziness, effectively.
Sure. Xander, so I asked this of a bunch of other folks before you showed up, and I'll ask you this now. What area of the story would you like to see developed more?
Yeah, I mean, it's the obvious, boring answer. By the way, I'll put my caveat here that I'm not a big lore person in EVE. I never really have been. I did really enjoy Source, by the way, Falcon. I think it's fantastic. So that's been a bit more of an entryway for me, but I'm not a lore player really at all. But for me, the one thing I would pick, and it's the boring answer, is you want to see the Jove angle explored more. And you know that they're going to go there eventually. You know that that's the untapped place that CCB has to go at some point. You know what I mean? But when it happens and how it happens, I don't know. But that's what I would like to see. I would love to see it tied into perhaps player-created stargates, perhaps the space that we're going to there. That's a complete hunch, I guess. There's so many different ways. There's so many different ways they could do it, but Jove space, and Jove as a race is something I'd like to see filled out a bit more.
Can you imagine what would happen if there was Jovians on the other side of those gates? Everyone would come running back through like, holy shit, shut it down, turn it off, don't go through there.
Or,
Too late,
in
the
the
gazebo
past,
catches you and eats you.
Or in the past, however many years it's been, we've all developed newer and better technologies, and we go through, we kick their ass, and we take their stuff.
You know what I'd love to see, and this is like throwing a massive curveball because it's something that doesn't even exist in backstory for EVE. I'd love to see what happened to the other side of the EVE gate when it collapsed. That's like that's a huge question that I have. There's like the solar system, like Sol, the original solar system that we live in, like present day. That wasn't too close to the wormhole. It was like the wormhole was discovered on the edge of colonized space, and Earth has always been depicted as kind of sort of not to be the prophecy of doomsday or anything, but sort of on the trajectory that we're heading on now for overpopulation, pollution, sort of overcrowding to the point where we eventually have to colonize the moon, Mars. We have to look at going even further abroad, like out towards the boundaries of the solar system. And I'm just wondering, all those people, all those hundreds of billions of people that were there before the gate collapsed and who were logistically supplying the systems around the wormhole when they came in, what happened to all those guys? That's kind of a big burning question that I have, because there's got to be some of them who survived. I mean, the guys who were cut off from infrastructure managed to survive and create what became New Eden today. And that, well, it's a loose term because some people would argue it, but that is quote unquote flourishing right now. So yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to see what happened to the other side of the gate and just how bad the devastation was. That would be one thing that I'd be very, very interested in.
Most likely, probably something similar to what happened on the New Eden side, except less severe. On the New Eden side, the colonies that survived long-term were the colonies that were able to grow their own food and had their own local planetary or solar system infrastructures. Presumably, the Earth side of the gate would be less affected because, like you said, the EVE wormhole was discovered on the edge of colonized space. So, first of all, even if the entire Earth-side infrastructure was affected in the same way, Earth itself might possibly be fine because, again, it's growing its own food, it's got a solar system infrastructure, it's got the it has to have the oldest solar system infrastructure of any human-inhabited solar system by definition, because that's where we started.
Right.
And chances are the devastation didn't even reach that far. So civilization may have been continuing for the past 12,000 years.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it could have turned around and they could have just been like, oh well, wormhole's gone, sucks to be those guys, and then just got on with life, you know?
Exactly. And now they're 12 millennia ahead of us in technology.
Yeah.
Which is a frightening thought.
Sucks to be us. I mean, we could start a wormhole over to them and find out that they're just sitting ready to kick our ass.
They could like have huge brains, like massive brains, like Mars Attacks, and they could be like super intelligent. I mean, look where the New Eden side of the wormhole has gone with cloning. You know, look at what's going on with implants and biotechnology, and you know, integrating humans into starships, for God's sake, and you know, effectively allowing people to cheat death by cloning. It's amazing technology. And then imagine a civilization that then has a 12 millennia leap ahead of that. And you're looking at something that's, I mean, perhaps they went off on a completely different tangent, you know? Like a completely different area of science has been, you know, worked on in that respect.
But isn't it the fundamental, like one of the you cannot ever move things of Eve is that there's no aliens?
Well, I mean, we're all... There's the Jove.
They're not aliens.
Think about this. To the indigenous life on the opposite side of the wormhole that led to New Eden, we are the friggin' aliens when we're playing Eve. So look at it from that point of view. Like,
I get your point and I agree with you, but it's a cop-out.
Not at all.
If you go that far, then anybody can progress around the circle and become alien.
Mm-hmm.
Which is true. I get it. But one of the tenets of the New Eden universe is that aliens from outside of the human gene pool don't exist. That's the one. If I remember reading it somewhere that if ever it comes to having aliens be added to the Eve story, like half the CCP staff will get a quit or something at the beginning. So yeah. So
I suppose it depends on your definition of alien.
I mean, there were plenty of alien animals. Long-limbed roes come to mind.
Yeah, fetal.
Yeah.
The original breed of slaverhound. I mean, looking at 12,000 years of change, the differences in breeding for livestock will be absolutely vast now. You know, it's crazy to think how much genetic change will happen in 12,000 years in a society that is completely cut off from what it knew before. And you know, yeah, okay, so like you transport a shitload of livestock through a wormhole, and but you then start feeding them on a different kind of grass and a different kind of whatever the hell you're going to feed them on the opposite side. How does that affect them? You know, what do they eventually becoming in 25, 30 generations? It's interesting, and it's like, I think like, yeah, sure, if you're talking aliens in terms of little green men turning up and shooting laser rays at people, then that would be fairly dumb, because Eve is kind of grounded in sci-fi. Well, it's grounded in solid sci-fi. But it's like, yeah, I don't know. Who knows what's on the other side of the Stargates that are coming? I mean, there could be something really fucked up out there for all we know.
Yeah, the possibilities... Sorry, I'll make this quick. The possibilities for the Earth side of the Eve Gate range from they're all dead to as far advanced as the mutants are beyond you, so am I ahead of them.
Yep.
So what are on the sort of inspiration side, what are your inspirations or works that you draw from when you're working in and on the Eve universe?
It's kind of funny, but I write before I came to CCP, I wrote a lot of player fiction, and I always explored the really dark, seedy, gritty underworld of Eve. So I was always writing on like sort of the criminal side of things. And my main inspiration in terms of like talking about organized crime and utilizing organized crime came from like the last 30, 40 years of cinema history. And sort of that was a kind of a base ground, and then looking at how those stories had been adapted from like what actually happened into the movies that you see and the books that you read. That was one of my big focuses when I was writing about the underworld and the criminal side of Eve. But I mean, in terms of setting, there's a lot of stuff comes to mind. I mean, there's the cliche stuff like, you know, BSG, Blade Runner, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then there's the not so cliche stuff like I mean, and then there's like Total Recall and stuff like that as well. It's like you kind of try and I think you sort of take influence from the sci-fi you see when you're growing up. I mean,
Right.
it's kind of a difficult question to answer really, because I watch and read like so much friggin' sci-fi that like there's just a mishmash of everything in there. It's like my head is just a messed up place.
I'm gonna bust in
Well-
and say to someone on the Q&A, yes, this is live. I can read your questions, all that. So feel free to submit questions for any of the folks in here. But yes, it does work as advertised.
Wow, you got me really thinking now.
But yet,
Like, yeah.
since we're talking about the seedy criminal underside, you could just go with the classics. Make him an offer he can't refuse.
Well, yeah, I mean, like for instance, when you look at the pirate factions, they have kind of similarities and ties with organized crime. I mean, for instance, the Guristas are they're kind of a cross between a triad or a Yakuza family, sort of a hybrid of the two, because they started out as a shitty little gang, but they're highly organized now. They're very well funded. They're they're to the point now where they're kind of sort of overall, yes, they're one big group of people that report to Kareko Kosakami, the rabbit, but in the same respect, within the Guristas, there are a lot of smaller families and cells that kind of compete against each other. But when the shit hits the fan, they all come to support each other because they're all branded with the same logo, effectively. The Serpentis Corporation, yeah, I mean, you can liken them to a drug cartel, basically, but a highly organized and fairly sophisticated one. And then the Angel Cartel are basically just the mob. Like, they have their finger in every pie. I mean, to the point where they actually have the Serpentis Corporation as kind of a protectorate that they provide security for and assist with. And I'm not even going to go into Sanchez Nation, to be fair, because they're just messed up. Like, crazy people wrote Sanchez Nation. Crazy people. Crazy people who, yeah, a little bit unhinged. But, yeah.
Join the purity of nation.
Yeah, I mean, like, Sanchez Nation is sort of like, yeah, some form of, like, hybrid of kind of a trans or post-humanist cult and, like, a religious cult. And this, like, all rolled into one. It's like, it's crazy. And then, yeah. Then, I mean, the Blood Raiders are just nuts. I mean,
Yeah,
the Blood Raiders are
Sanchez
kind of
Nation,
just a religious sect.
Sanchez Nation is essentially the Borg as invented by and loyal to a gunrunner.
Well, that's kind of a rough approximation, I suppose. No, it's interesting.
So what would you to sort of combine the new player experience and the new player experience and the sorry, spacing out for just a second. To combine the new player experience and roleplay threads, how would you suggest folks who are interested in getting into RP approach the game?
So what I did is that I started playing just after release, like 7 days after release. But there was already a lot of stuff that was like, there was like the fundamental basics of what the game was supposed to be about in terms of backstory. So the people who were like really, really old school role players from 2003, 2004 are kind of sort of grew with the role play and kind of grew into it. But I think my recommendation for people coming into even wanting to get involved in the backstory is just to start reading. Whether they're looking at sort of the few scientific articles that we have, which are in some cases outdated and need to be updated. That's something that I'm working on. Or whether they're looking at sort of chunks of Eve's source or just factional background or notable individuals. I mean, even if you read into the histories of some of the people who were involved in power politics, then you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot just by looking at people's histories or character histories in Eve. So, yeah, I mean, my advice to anyone coming in is just start reading, basically, and just dive into it, because if you're interested in roleplay, you're obviously interested in narrative and literature. So you should just dig in.
Sure.
But I was just talking with some people last night, actually, who don't know much about. Well, they know a little bit about Eve, but they were, they found out that I played Eve, and they were like asking me all these questions, and a lot of their questions were lore stuff. They're not role players though. They were just interested in the backstory. So you don't necessarily have to be a role player to be really interested in the lore.
Oh no, absolutely, and that's kind of why well, part and parcel of why we wrote Eve Source as well. Like, Eve Source is like kind of a snapshot in time, and it gives you like a high level overview of what the hell's going on in New Eden, pretty much. It gives you a little bit of background on each faction, the important people in it, each pirate faction, the important people in it, a little bit of background on like Stargate technology, ship technology, a little bit of, a little bit of flavor on cloning and clone mercenaries, that kind of thing. And it even digs into Valkyrie ever so slightly and just makes a mark on the surface of what's coming in that respect. So yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily have to be a huge a huge RP nerd to be able to dive into the backstory of Eve. I think you have to have sort of an interest in sci-fi, I would definitely say. And you have to be a little bit twisted, I guess, as well. But it's something that I think everyone can dive into. I mean, for instance, I wouldn't to someone who was like, I've never played this game before, but I'd really like to learn a little bit about the backstory. I wouldn't slap them in the face with a copy of Empyrean Age and say, read this and you'll feel better, because that's just diving too heavily in. There's, you need a glossary of terms and a history of New Eden to understand what the hell was going on in the book, kind of thing, because you just wouldn't be able to relate to the locations, to the people, to the factions involved. So yeah, I think you kind of sort of need to dig into sort of a high-level overview first, and that's kind of what Eve Source is designed to do. It's just like a rough outline and a sort of a glossary and an index of the fundamentals of RP, or the fundamentals of Eve's IP rather. The kind of set in stone and won't change.
So it goes.
No one's getting a movie tomorrow, maybe.
Someone's got their mic on. I know a number of people who got into Eve actually because of the, going in, reading a whole bunch of chronicles, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you, I guess, which would Eve's Source be the place to start there, or would you point them at some one thing in particular? Like the one episode of Doctor Who you make your friend watch.
I'd point them towards Source, definitely. Or maybe even True Stories. It's a nice entry point because it's less of a wall of text and it's more friendly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd probably point them at either True Stories or I'd point them at Source, and I'd give them a high-level overview, because even when you start reading Chronicles, there's maybe some that are a little bit too in-depth, or some that you'd be wondering, okay, it's talking about this faction of this guy, but I don't really know much about them. So then you would go off looking for other pieces of backstory pertaining to, for instance, if you read about the Garistas, and then they were talking about the kidnapper of Lucien Rolleur, the Gallente ambassador to the Galdari state, then you might go and start reading about the Galdari state or the Gallente Federation. Then from the Gallente Federation, you'd go read about the Serpentis Corporation and the Angel Cartel from there. And then, you'd go from the Angel Cartel to the Jove, and then you jump from the Jove to Concord, and then you just, you kind of just branch out like that. Everything is sort of linked and intertwined. So, yeah, I think as a starting point, the Chronicles are good, but my horrific level of OCD, I'd probably start with Eve Source and try and get a handle on it there personally.
Makes sense.
Personally, I started. What got me into EVE Online was Clear Skies 1 and 2.
Nice, nice. And yeah, there's a lot of player-generated content out there that's absolutely fantastic. It's a good entry gate for people.
My question is, why isn't Eve Source have item in game, so that you can know that there's a shadowy knowledge book of knowledge that's the source, and pull people in that way.
So the actual item in game Eve Source is it's an item that is given to you when you redeem a special edition code that's in the limited edition of Eve Source. So it's basically just like a little item that you get for that. And yeah, the in-game item in terms of backstory is meant to be like sort of the list of who's who kind of thing, and a little bit of background on people.
I'm hearing an echo again. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, it's yeah, that's what the in-game version of Eve Source is supposed to be.
I mean, it's good, but it doesn't it's not clear to new players. And in some ways, having it as a limited edition item, which I got somewhere, that I could remember. If I could have it and I can't remember I have it, that's even worse. You know, there's no in for new players either.
Yeah, I mean, the actual item in game doesn't really do anything. It's just a trade commodity with a little description. It's more just a collectible than anything else. So it's like having for instance, it's like having like, you know, the Christmas stuff that we gave out a while ago, like a Tank of Honor or stuff like that.
I have a Tank of Honor. It's a great item.
That's why there needs to be an NPC station or something out there that gives out not the ones the sources that are given out as buddy, but as a one like the Arcalan or whatever book that's just points you to it or something, instead of having so that any player that you want to know about what's happening in Eve, go over here, you know, and have it one of the quest lines in the new player experience that go find the location where the source was written or something. I mean,
you know, bring it up. Go ahead.
Oh no, you go ahead.
I'm going to change the subject so you finish your thought.
Go ahead. That's what I was going to do too.
So bringing up Clear Skies, I think, you know, a lot of us, especially when it was fairly new, even still, it's got a lot of impact. But has there not been any thoughts of maybe doing something more like that, where it's, you know, character-driven, not necessarily story, but like a movie or like a small episode with, you know, in-game assets even?
In terms of in-game assets, that's something that we've never really thought of, at least not to my knowledge. But yeah, there is other stuff that's being looked at. I mean, I know that Tori's been on stage a couple of times at FanFest, and he's been talking about the series that we have in the works. So yeah, I mean, it would depend on what the uptake was like on that, I guess, and how that ended up working out. But to me, like for me, I would absolutely. One thing that so in terms of like using in-game assets, I probably wouldn't do that because I don't know. I don't think it, from my point of view at least personally, while it looks great in the game, I don't think it'd be good for like, you know, as an animated series or something like that. But one thing that I did love was the way that Dark Horse took like Eve's assets and made an absolutely kick-ass looking comic book out of them. Like the visuals in True Stories and the way that they made like they made Eve ships into comic book ships but retained their original look and their original feel was fantastic. So like, as a fan of manga as well, I would be like, holy shit, and I would just buy the hell out of it if we like produce like an anime series based on Eve. Like, I would probably like quite literally have a heart attack if that happened.
I hope that never happens.
I'd love it. Like, obviously not with really bad Japanese acting, that would be terrible. But like an adult animated series would be pretty cool.
Get, you know.
All right, I gotta get going. Have a pleasant weekend, everyone.
And you too.
Yeah.
Steve, how do you? This is Steve Ronican. How do you interact with the lore? I know you do some sort of industrial high-sec stuff, but how much of that ends up touching lore stuff?
To be honest, not a great deal. How do I sound?
You sound fine.
Cool. I don't really interact with the lore that much. I like seeing it, but it doesn't add a great deal to the game for me, if you see what I mean. If it wasn't there, I would feel a lack of it, but I don't feel a need for it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, I had a post on my blog about my headcanon for what blueprints actually are. Because if it's just this is how you make something, that doesn't explain why you can only make limited copies, how invention works, etc. So but just over time, I worked out this is actually what I think it is in my head. So other than that, I've not really touched on lore much.
I think a lot of people end up building in their own little headcanons in their head. It's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges we face. Like, in terms of writing backstory, that is like a huge challenge that we face. Is like, whenever you release something new, you're bound to piss at least one segment of people. And this is just the way that it is. I mean, it happens with any IP. Like, you know, there's this constant cry from the RP community and Eve, like, give us more information. We want to know like how things work, and we want to know the intricacies of this, or you know, the background behind that. And then you give them it, and it's like, this is shit because it doesn't fit with what I had in my head. And you're like, oh Jesus Christ. So yeah, I mean, it is very difficult. It's incredibly difficult in terms of striking a balance. And yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, one of the things that was a point of contention for a couple of our peers who contacted me about it was the population figures in Eve Source. And the population figures in Eve Source paint a picture of an absolutely enormous cluster of, you know, well over 5,000 star systems that has a range of populated planets, moons that are populated, dead space areas that are populated. And the population count is pretty extravagant, and it's extravagant because there's a lot of areas that are horrifically overcrowded, that are dirty, horrible slums, and generally there's a lot of places where you can't really get a solid idea of what the hell's going on and just how many people are there, purely because of the sheer number of people. So yeah, it's like, it was a point of contention for a few people, but we actually sat down and did the math, and like I sat down with a couple of the other people who worked on Eve Source and did the math on it, and even within the Eve Source team there were a few disagreements about, like, should the number be lower, should the number be higher, should we break it down differently. And what we actually ended up doing was we ended up using the Minmatar Republic as like an anchor, as a base anchor for the number, and then building the other factions around it to give the required ratios. Because before Eve Source, the only like metrics we had on population were like the rough proportion of Minmatar people that lived in the Republic versus the proportion that were enslaved versus the proportion that were living in the Federation. So those were the only real solid metrics that we had to start out with in terms of population, and then we had to put numbers to them. So we started with the Minmatar Republic and worked out, and it ended up with the Amar Empire being absolutely fucking enormous. And then it turned out, you know, the Federation was huge, and then the state in terms of people looked really small compared to everyone else. But that kind of fits with backstory because the state are actually manufacturing people effectively to try and boost their numbers. So it's like, yeah, I mean, in the end, the picture that was painted was really solid. But again, you know, you can't please everyone. There was some people who were unhappy with the Jovian stuff. There was a couple of people who were unhappy with the Galenti stuff, the Kaldari stuff. Some people who like had questions about the pirate faction stuff. And I think it's just a case of striking a balance, because like going back to the original point, it was, you can never please everyone, and you know, there's always a thirst for information from people who are interested to hear more about an IP, but some people get bent out of shape when that information arrives and it's not what they have in their head, kind of thing. So yeah, it's tricky, it's difficult, but you just got to kind of work with it, I suppose.
Yeah, so it goes.
How often are you looking back at something that you wrote, you know, a year ago and be like, ah, geez, now I'm really trapped?
Never. Like, I've never done that in anything I've wrote at CCP. I have actually looked, I was really, like, so when I came to CCP, I closed down my old corporation's forums that had all my player fiction hosted on them, and there was like well in excess of 2,000 pages of player fiction on there that I'd written over the course of 9 years. And I was like, hey, you know, maybe I'll set up like a WordPress blog or something and republish it all. And I went back and I looked at some of the stuff that I wrote when I was 19 in 2003, and I was like, oh, holy fuck, I'm not releasing this. And I was like, okay, I really need to sit down and re-edit all of this as an adult and not as a drunk adolescent teenager and really fix it. So there is stuff that I've written in the past that I'm like, whoo, yeah, I've come a long way since then.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I've never... Whenever I've written, and a lot of the stuff that I wrote for Eve Source as well, I've stuck to the facts that are well established and known, and kind of left things a little bit open-ended so we have room to play with. I mean, one of the big points of contention in technical backstory was the whole, you know, the operation of Stargates and their principle of operation and how they work. And the original backstory that was written for them revolved around like binary star systems and
I remember that.
You know, using the gravity wells created by them, and it was kind of off, and it didn't like seem right to me from a technical standpoint. It wasn't represented in game, so I sat down and I basically like spent about 3 weeks on the friggin' NASA website and like spent God knows how long, you know, looking through math and a million different articles on Wikipedia. I was just like, my head was fucked by the end of it, but I ended up like drafting together the stuff that's now in Eve Source and that's now canon for Stargates, and it's like, you know, maybe it's a point of contention for some people because they like the binary star idea, but in the same respect, it gives a much more realistic picture of what's painted in game, and it gives a lot more of a technical background to actually what you visually see in game and what you experience when you go from one point to another after a jump.
It's the whole connection of the connection of lore and mechanics has always been very interesting to me, because you've got you've got something where you're asserting that this is how the mechanics work, even if it seems, at least as a player, you sometimes have to bend over backwards. In particular, I'm thinking of the encounter surveillance system here. It was the lore for that, like that players are now, that Concord is paying, or not Concord, Empires are paying players because, you know, the team that designed it said that they were going to.
Yeah. I didn't actually write that, so I need to look it over, because it's one thing that, like, there are even gaps in my knowledge as well. Like.
Yeah, I mean, this was, you know, it was I understand how that came about, just as someone who was on the CSM at the time. You know, it was a kind of contentious feature and all that, but it
was a very contentious feature.
But when it actually did come out, it was, you know, it wasn't like they were going to rewrite the feature from something that people were finally mostly happy with.
Yeah.
To let.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of grey areas in backstory. There's a lot of grey areas, particularly in technical backstory, in terms of like engineer and backstory that really need to be filled in. I mean, there was like a really light version of. From back when I was a player, I have a huge long article on the capsule, its operation, cloning, and exactly how everything meshes together and everything works. From back when I was a player, and a lot of that ended up going into Eve Source in terms of the capsule's construction, its operation, and myself and Delegate Zero sat down and worked the finer points of cloning out as well, around the technical backstory that we'd established for the capsule. So but there's a lot more detail that I still have that I haven't released about that. So that's something that I'd like to put in a wiki article when I get it edited and get it get it put in a presentable state, let's say. Like, some of my notes at times look like the ravings of a friggin' lunatic that are like scrawled on a bathroom wall somewhere. So I really need to get my shit in order in that respect.
I did appreciate how much EVE Online players can freak out normal people in that I was watching BSG, going back and watching it for the second or third time with my partner, and I speculated, I wonder if I wonder if the Cylons can just kill themselves to get across the galaxy. It's got to be a lot faster than flying. And the look that I got was wonderful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, it's fantastic.
This horrified expression that that would be a legitimate way to get yourself anywhere.
Yeah, just like, shit, I'm late for lunch. Put your clothes on, go to the bar,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's convenient. And I'm sure that in EVE there are capsuleers who are unhinged enough to do that. Just to be like, shit, I really can't be bothered to fly, and the end of bus is going to take me 4 hours, and I'll have to deal with sitting next to some Amarian bastard who's chanting all the way there. So, screw it. Gun to your head, blow your brains out, make sure your jump plan's in the right place. All good, you're home in time for cornflakes. I'm sure there are people who do that in EVE's backstory. It wouldn't surprise me at all. There are people who are twisted and unhinged enough. Quite a few NPC characters come to mind who would do that. So,
well, don't we only know of the one guy that does that, like the broker or whatever, or is he only special because he has multiple clones at the same time?
Yeah, multiple clones at the same time is that thing. But yeah, in terms of like just being like, shit, I'm going to be late for lunch and blowing your brains out. I mean, God bless the poor son of a bitch who has to clean you up at the starting point, but at the finishing point, at least you roll out of the vat, you get dried off, you put your clothes on. Maybe you've got a bit of a headache for a few hours, but you can go and have your lunch and settle down at the other end of the galaxy.
It's certainly the way players play it. I mean,
absolutely.
I want to get on a roam. I'm not gonna fly all the way through Jita. That's a long friggin' way. I'm just gonna undock, blow my brains out, or get someone to do it for me, and then I wake up across the galaxy, get in my new ship, and go outside. What's the big deal there?
Yeah.
But
suicide in public areas is strictly prohibited.
Exactly.
Somebody put that in there for a reason. You're right.
Exactly.
Yep.
It's
It's in dust if people haven't seen it, heard it.
Yeah. The when they get around to an industrial ISI or SIS or whatever, how much is the lure's backstory lore you guys are gonna have to write before you actually throw that into the game? Do you think?
Can you repeat the question? I'm not sure what you mean by.
So there's this player desire for some sort of, and I posted about this, and you can find it in the CSM forums. There's a player desire for some sort of industrial ISIS or lineage or something like that that'll let you see when I'm building say I want to build a Titan. Well, a Titan is built of capital components. All right. What is a capital component built of? It's built of a capital component.
Right.
And this, that, and the other thing.
Holy carp, that'd be a lot of writing.
It would be a lot of writing, but it would be...
It's something I'd love to dig into, though.
It'd be glorious, and it would be... So I think what Salpin was asking is, how would that go on the lore end?
It would probably involve, I'm generally primarily the guy who does all the technical backstory and the the engineering backstory. So it would be basically me locked in a room for a month with a lamp and a computer and lots of Red Bull.
Who did we talk to about setting that up?
But the whole issue of having ISIS is that you don't have to spend a whole month.
Well,
it's all in the graphics.
I mean, there's still some, there's still some text around the, even in what I would think of as so-called normal ISIS, there's still
Yeah, there's still an element of text to it, and there's, you also have to make sure that everything's slotted together. So yeah, I mean, it's in terms of like the organizational tree. I mean, that's down to game design. They've already done that. You know how to build a capital component. You know what to put into it, then you know how to get that capital component to build a carrier or a super carrier or a Titan or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's more just adding the flavor to it, and yeah, that's not as easy as it sounds. Like,
Was it bad that I've never looked at ISIS?
You
Yes.
missed out
Yes.
on some good stuff.
I avoid looking at it because even on my characters that have been around since like 2003, it makes me want to cry that I don't have level 5 specialization in certain things. So I kind of
I don't think I have any level 5s. I'm gonna bring it up and see what
I do.
happens.
oh god,
Yeah.
I'm being assaulted by a cat again.
Yeah, I think my highest are like level 3s, and that's because I cannot be fucked to get the sensor strength skills up.
Yeah.
Basically, I won't do it. You can't make me. And all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Level
have,
5 Minmatar shuttle. Level 5 freighter.
All right.
Yeah, I have one character that's entirely Galenti specialized. He doesn't even have any of the other races frigate skills trained. Like, and it's just he just like has hybrids and missiles trained, and everything is Galenti. And yeah, like I look at his ISIS, and it's amazing because he has like everything maxed out for Galenti, but like he can't even fly like a Rifter. It's kind of a nice contrast. So I just look at the Galenti side of things and I'm happy. Then when I look at everything else, I'm just like, I suck so bad.
So I'm missing the shield reinforcement stuff for a level 5 on the. Oh, for some reason my screen share went down. There, I'm missing the shield reinforcement for a level 5 on the Galente stuff.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think my highest skilled character now is about 145 million skill points, I think, if I remember correctly. But I miss my old man. He was like, he would have been in excess of 230 now if I still had him.
Yeah.
In fact, I think he'd have been closing on 250. He was really, really high skilled. Always had at least a set of plus 3s plugged in. I shall be right back.
Nice.
Now I feel great about my 72 million. Thanks a lot.
I mean, I've only got like what, 50 million? I'm lagging behind here.
Yeah, but you've only been playing for what? I guess about 2 years
2
now.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, 55 million here.
Wait, how are you on 50 million at 2 years? Did you buy somebody?
No, I mean I'm exaggerating. I'm at like 43.
Okay. So I thought it was like 18 mil-ish a year or something.
Yeah, I'm plus or minus. I've got let me think. Yeah, I've got my queue's empty at the moment, and I've got 45 million. I didn't buy. I did play very briefly in 2007.
Yeah.
So that'll, that covers my.
It was an eventful day. My cat fell into the kitchen sink, and it was full of water, and he's like panicking and swimming. That was wonderful.
Lovely.
So I'll deal with my flooded kitchen in a little while.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can do that. You can do that just about now because we're about ready to wrap up. I do want to give a shout out to Web Spaceships on Twitter, who has reminded me that he has a excellent Eve lore guide.
He certainly does.
For people who are, for the whole question of what do you do when you start at Eve, or when you start at Eve lore, that is not a bad one. I've certainly checked it out.
And it just got updated, which is the best part.
Mhm.
Frequent
that
updates are always good.
is such a daunting task. Like my
Yeah, it's
heaviest, my weightiest blog post ever is like the first paragraph of that whole series. I have so much respect for those guys.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is pretty mental to see how much effort that goes in on the community side. It's nice that you guys give us so much support, to be honest, because it's daunting for us writing stuff. Like it can be pretty in depth, and it can be pretty troublesome at times to get everything down in words. So yeah, it's nice to see that kind of that it gets out there and it gets analyzed and it gets messed around with and people sort of fool with it. It's good to see that there's an interest in it at least.
Yeah. All right. Any last shout-outs for anyone? Thank you, Falcon, for coming and hanging out and chatting with all of us.
No problem at all.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Sugar Kyle, next time you have to come. She said that she's not the most outgoing of people apparently, and she says it's scary how friendly I am. She was not coming unless she was specifically invited, so I invite her specifically right now.
Yeah, no, Sugar, you should come.
Definitely.
I swear I've dropped this link in CSM Skype and said, guys, come to my.
That's not a specific invitation. That's a general. You have to put her name in there.
It's like, you there, young lady, come and talk shit with us.
Exactly.
Yep. Come and talk shit.
It's the best.
All right. Yeah, no, it's a fun time. All right, so I'm going to stop the broadcast. Peace, y'all. Sorry to all the people in the questions who were like, hi, and Eve should be free to play. I assume you have seen Plex, which can make it kind of free to play, but it's way worse. Just pay $15.
Or
Rest
yeah,
of
I mean,
you put
get a
better things in
job and
Q&A.
afford $15.